Excellent. So officially, welcome everyone to our public talk this morning. My name is Stan Yu. I am the Research and Communications Coordinator at the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives, located here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm filling in today for our director, Marc-Andre Pigeon, who is currently taking a much needed and well-deserved vacation. Before we begin today's conversation, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are coming to you from Treaty 6 territory and the traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Métis. From them, we can learn to be grateful for the land, the water, and the skies that make all of this possible. We can also learn from them the importance of recognizing our shared responsibility over these resources and how we have to work together to make sure they are still there for our children and grandchildren and 7 generations ahead. And it is our imperative to all work together to advance truth and reconciliation in this country. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you today Professor Morris Altman. Morris is the Dean of the University of Dundee School of Business and Chair Professor of Behavioural and Institutional Economics and Cooperatives. He was formerly the Dean and Professor at the Newcastle Business School in Australia and Head of Economics and Finance and Professor at the Victoria University of Wellington. He is an emeritus professor at the University of Saskatchewan, where he was department head, professor, amongst many other roles in the Department of Economics for close to 20 years. He has published 20 books and well over 120 peer-reviewed articles and has over 50 years of experience with cooperatives. Today, Morris will be providing us with an introduction to the cooperative sector in Scotland, some of the cooperative research and educational programming offers at the University of Dundee. Without further ado, welcome, Professor Altman.
Thanks, Stan, for your very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually here physically, but speaking to everyone virtually. And thanks for taking your time to listen to what I have to say. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to present, so this is a sort of an informal talk, although I have to always put together a PowerPoint. So you have a PowerPoint. I'll talk about different issues. I was going to talk a little bit about my research as well, but it'll be just a little bit, and I'm happy to take questions. I spoke yesterday with Marc-Andre virtually about possible relationships we might have between University of Dundee's Business School and the University of Saskatchewan Centre for the Study of Cooperatives. By the way, Dundee is not in the United States, it's not in Australia or New Zealand, it's in Scotland. So this is the University of Dundee in Scotland, just in case. And now let's see if the slide, it worked. I tested it. And now,
if you just click on the PowerPoint, does that do anything?
Yeah, it did. And now it was delayed action. It's okay. It's working, I think. Okay, so I was asked to say something about co-ops in Scotland. As Stan mentioned, I've been involved in the cooperative sector, including working in real cooperatives for over 50 years. And I've been involved with the cooperative sector, of course, in Canada, in Saskatchewan, when I was here in Saskatchewan, and then in New Zealand and in Australia. So now I'm in Scotland. So in Scotland, it's important to note, and people might know this already, there's a relatively large co-op sector in Scotland, although the size of the sector is not well measured. And that's a problem one finds actually internationally in terms of measuring the co-op sector. How big is it in terms of its contribution to total output, total employment, and in terms of any positive effects it has in the broader society, as economists would like to refer to that as positive externality. So there's serious measurement problems, and this actually causes issues with regards to lobbying government and in terms of organizing for public policy changes, because you have to actually point out to government, how big is the co-op sector? Why should it give a damn about the co-op sector? Why should it assist the co-op sector? So that's an issue. But we know there are a fair number of co-ops. And there's also in Scotland, as elsewhere, there's not a very good understanding of cooperatives. What is a cooperative? Is a cooperative different from a social enterprise? What is a social enterprise? And which type of organizational form will best allow us to achieve sustainable growth and development while also providing us with a very strong dose of fairness and social justice, which can be defined in different ways. And even within the cooperative sector, the cooperative identity is very often held under wraps. It's not made public. People say, well, I don't want to talk. I don't want to say I'm part of a co-op. I don't want to say I'm a co-op because I won't be able to sell my product or I won't be able to do business with government. So people very often within the cooperative sector, there is a belief that the cooperative identity is a bad thing. And that's something that one finds in Scotland. It finds that in England and Wales and Northern Ireland. And I did some work when I was actually here at the University of Saskatchewan. I ran a classroom experiment where, at least in terms of the experiment, I was able to demonstrate that individuals have a preference to purchase from cooperatives if they believe a cooperative actually is a good thing, if they understand what a cooperative is. And this would be the case if cooperatives charge the same price as a non-co-op for the same type of product, which goes against actually a lot of economic theory, which suggests people should give a damn where they buy from. But people do have, according to what I've done, they have a preference for cooperative products, and even if cooperative products are charged a somewhat higher price, they will not lose complete market share, which is what economists would tend to say. They will. There is a feel-good effect about buying from a co-op up to a certain point. So the whole cooperative identity issue is quite important and needs more research. And it's also important in terms of developing a co-op and for cooperators to better understand the power of cooperatives and the cooperative advantage. Now I'm trying to move slides. Oh, this is, I'm speaking to you from a hotel here in Saskatoon. That's why things are slow. See, now I'm going back. So back to 3. Okay, so certain aspects of the cooperative sector in Scotland. I'm involved with the Scottish Agricultural Organization Society, and it's called SAOS, abbreviation. You wouldn't know it has anything to do with cooperatives, but this is the peak organization of agricultural cooperatives in Scotland, and it is a very big player in the not only in agriculture, in the agricultural sector, in other words, growing food and raising cattle and growing barley and things like that, but also it's an important player in terms of the food sector, the food and beverage sector. So that organization actually is very committed to cooperative principles, but their cooperative identity, for the most part, is hidden, which is interesting. There are close to 60 members. Some are small, some are big, but it is a, as I said, it's a very, very large organization, and some of the members of the co-op are farmers. Some of them are machine providers, tractors and etc., which are shared based on cooperative principles amongst members, which of course saves a lot of costs, makes each small co-op farmer economically sustainable. They wouldn't be able to compete on alone. It's only by joining hands and joining forces that they could be competitive. The bottom line for cooperators, it's not only in Scotland, is financial sustainability. They're not in it simply to do good. They are in a cooperative because for them it makes good business sense. That's the bottom line. They don't want to go bankrupt. They need to generate a surplus. They need to reinvest. With Brexit, they have to deal with all the mess that Brexit has brought to farmers in the UK. But this is true of most cooperators I've met, and leaders I've met in Australia, New Zealand, indeed in Canada, and the UK, it's a business. They have to be profitable. They have to be sustainable. They have to be competitive. And in so doing, because they're cooperatives, they can provide more fairness. So farmers get a fairer share. Machine providers get a fair share of the economic pie. And they're incentivized to be more productive, because it's their organization. So bottom line, financial sustainability. If they're financially sustainable, they can do good for society. And also doing good for society makes sense from a business point of view. It all ties together. There is amongst CEOs an increasing focus on cooperative education. It's recognized that it's important, but the cooperative sector has done not a very great job in providing cooperative educations. So just, past half a year, CEOs and myself were awarded a major, it's a 5-year full scholarship for a PhD student in the barley sector, because barley goes into producing something that a lot of people like a lot, which is whiskey. And Scotland is a major producer of high quality whiskey. So the government and one of its agencies said, okay, well, we have to compete for this. You can get this scholarship. And the whole idea for this student is to look at the barley provision and how to make barley provision more green or environmentally friendly, while at the same time allowing farmers to remain economically competitive internationally. So this will look at a whole bunch of different issues, but education is important, and they and other co-ops in Scotland are very interested in more and more cooperative education. And it's going to be, once again, slide transition. We should have a little commercial. Long live cooperatives, something like that. So, other bit about Scotland, there's a big push by government towards employee-owned companies. So this is part of the Scottish government strategy, and it's called, this whole initiative is under the domain of the Employee Ownership Trust. What this does, it tries to encourage employees to buy out private sector firms. Very often, this is the case when the owner has done a crappy job running the firm and is on the verge of going bankrupt. So it could be a very high risk proposition to workers. And in other cases, you have owners who just want to sell out. They don't want to stay in the business anymore. And one way of selling, given government support, is to sell their business to their employees. And this is all quite interesting, because how well these employee-owned firms perform and how fair they are really depends on the governance structure of the employee-owned firm. And that's some of the research I'm doing now, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the point here is, yes, the Scottish government really supports strongly employee-owned firms. And this really requires a lot more analysis in terms of governance, risk to employees, safeguarding employees from, in a sense, being misled into putting in their savings or pensions in a firm that might go broke. So there's all sorts of issues. The good news here is the government saying, okay, we support employee-owned companies, but the government doesn't have a good understanding of what a co-op is. And in a lot of these companies, the employees own the company, but they don't run the company. And of course, all co-ops are not run by the workers. They typically appoint a board, and they have a large say on the board. And there is a lot of say in terms of day-to-day operations. But in a lot of these employee-owned companies in Scotland, you have a board. There might be one worker representative, and it's very often it's run by as if it were an investor-owned firm. Nevertheless, this is one model. So this is a Scottish model. And I'm working actually with one company that underwent this transition in the care sector. But this company's actually run according to co-op principles. So which is interesting. So I'm going to now, oh, that was fast. Slide number 5. So just a little bit more on these employee-owned firms. As I mentioned, you have a management board that runs the company, just like before. It could be actually the same people. And a lot of that management may not at all know what a co-op is, may not know if there is such a thing as a cooperative advantage. They might actually think there's something that they would refer to as a co-op disadvantage if the company was ran more based on cooperative principles. So that's really an interesting issue with regards to the mental model that managers have in terms of how to run a firm, how best to run a firm. There's not necessarily, as I mentioned before, room for employee voice, which is critical, I think, towards having a cooperative advantage. And even day to day, some of these companies don't have trust in employees to engage in day-to-day decision making, where you have to make a quick decision. Let's say something gets messed up in the production line. Can an employee sort of press a button and say, oh, let me fix this? Or does it have to get approval by management? So in a true cooperative where there's a lot of trust, employees would have much more of a say. And actually, it's interesting, if you go back in the literature, Toyota, which is, of course, an investor-owned firm, had a lot of this trust dimension in operating its firms, which increases productivity dramatically as compared to General Motors and a lot of the American-owned firms, where the starting principles, we all hate each other's guts. And maybe there was a good reason for that. But there are different models of employee-owned firms in Scotland, but there is a huge issue in terms of understanding what a co-op is, what are cooperative principles, why are they really of any importance? Like, who gives a damn? Is it a bunch of academics writing a code of conduct, and who cares? And also in terms of employees, there is a gap in their understanding of co-ops and co-op principles. And trying to move to 6. Oh. Slowly. Okay, here's 6. We'll stay at 6. Oh, this is a simple slide. No, I skipped here. Okay, there are other types of co-ops in Scotland as well, so that's something to be aware of. A lot of the other co-ops are quite small, and nothing wrong with that, but they really don't have much impact on the broader society. So what's really critical in Scotland in the cooperative movement is building up the cooperative sector amongst the larger players in the economy, which will also then provide support to the smaller players in the economy. And like in a lot of countries, there's a lot of confusion between a cooperative and a social enterprise. So some other work I've been doing, and people might be quite aware that most social enterprises are privately owned, and they call themselves social enterprise. They're there to do good and stuff like that. They're not really interested in profits, but a lot of social enterprises really take their direction from their owners. And even though they say they're not maximizing profits, they're maximizing the benefits of the owners. Completely different from a co-op, which the objective of which is to maximize member benefits. So that's the other bit of confusion you have in the UK, and you have it elsewhere. The difference between co-ops and social enterprise, and actually in Australia, where I spent some time and I was doing some research for the peak organization in co-ops, social enterprise peak organization organized themselves and convinced the government not to allow co-ops to bid for any government contracts, because they said co-ops are really evil. They're interested in making money. Well, social enterprise, well, we're just interested in the social good. And what social good is an employee-owned firm interested in? They're just interested in making money for the employees. How evil. So anyway, that's caused that's a really big issue in some countries, not so much in the UK, but certainly in New Zealand, in Australia, and in other parts of the world. It's pretty sad because a lot of social enterprise have nothing to do with doing good. They do good for the owners. And maybe what I'm saying is controversial, I don't know. So I'll move on from this slide. Actually, I'm happy to take any questions if people have questions. Oh, no, here, 7. Okay, just some data which some people might be interested in. People know about Co-operatives UK, headquartered in Manchester. That's the peak organization of co-ops. It was founded in 1889. There's a lot of long tradition of cooperatives in the UK. And it's not, there were cooperatives in other parts of the world, but this is really in terms of strong national organization. In many ways, the cooperative sector in the UK led the way. And there are a lot of arguments and debates and struggles against, for example, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels with the communists, who were not very great supporters of co-ops, because co-ops said, well, we're gonna run a business within a market or capitalist economy, but we're gonna do it in such a way as to benefit customers and workers and members of our society. So there are over 7,000 co-ops in the UK, so which includes Scotland. This is in 2021, and there's a turnover that is total output, measured output. It's around 40 billion. There's been an increase in a number of co-ops year to year by a 1% or so, not that much, but there's been an increase as opposed to a decline. This is even with COVID. And there are approximately 14 million members of cooperatives in the UK. So percentage-wise, it's sort of large, but the percentage membership in cooperatives is actually much smaller than in Australia and New Zealand. And that's, well, it's a good study to engage in. It's interesting to note that when I was working in New Zealand and in Australia, the biggest supporters of the co-op movement, and they were fighting within government to bring in more money to co-ops, were members of members of the Conservative Party, or the relatively right wing, because a lot of them were farmers, and they were all members of co-ops, 2 co-ops, 3 co-ops, 4 co-ops, 5 co-ops. They were huge supporters, and yeah, so that was interesting. So co-ops were great because it's a good business model, and they got a fair share of output, and they all hated the big companies that were ripping off consumers, they felt, and ripping off of farmers. And in many instances, not in all instances, a lot of members of the Labour Party weren't great fans of co-ops. They believed the government should play a bigger role, more state ownership, as opposed to member and community ownership. So overall, co-ops in the UK are pretty resilient. If you measure resilience in terms of the relative number of the percentage of bankruptcies, they are of total firms, they are more resilient than investor-owned firms. So the bankruptcy rate or failure rate amongst co-ops is less than that of the investor-owned firms. This was true during COVID. And if you go through the data for the past 20 years, that percentage, it still sticks. And there have been studies on the United States, which is actually a major center for cooperatives. It's the same story. Cooperatives tend to be more financially and economically resilient, which pretty much goes against the type of education that people are provided with in economics, which is very important in terms of informing public policy. So now let me turn to cooperative education. The Cooperative College, that people might know of the Cooperative College, was founded over 100 years ago in Manchester, and it was founded to provide basic education to cooperators. And this is typically very often people with a high school education, sometimes not completing a high school education. This goes on, this is early on. And the whole idea of cooperative education is to be flexible, to meet the needs of cooperators, to meet the needs of students, which is what you would think, for example, universities should be all about. We have students, how can we meet your needs, students? Whereas the universities tend to be very inflexible, saying we have a certain model, we know what's best. If you think you need a more flexible model, that's because you just don't understand how universities run, how learning is best approached. But the model to co-op college was always, we need to serve members' needs. It's all about membership, hence flexibility. Mini courses are important. So in other words, instead of having, like in a university, you would have a semester-long course. This is more like executive education. You would have a mini course that would be done over 2 weekends, or even over a Saturday. You might want to know something about accounting for your firm, so you take a mini course. Or you might want to know, if you run a co-op, which is a machine shop, you might want to take a course on design or in engineering over the weekend. Co-op education in the UK has always been done at a non-university level. Although there have been attempts to broach the university area, which is more in terms of management, really nothing has come to fruition, which is quite interesting. And so there's nothing at a university level for cooperative managers, which I'll argue in a minute is very, very, very important. And I've been involved in this for decades. It's mind-boggling how difficult it is to provide this higher level of co-op education, or at any level, anywhere. Even though co-ops are fairly important in a lot of countries, it's just mind-boggling. In Australia, we started something which collapsed after I left, but there was nothing there. There's nothing in New Zealand. And say in Canada, we have St. Mary's University, but it offers a relatively higher level type of course or degree. It's a master's degree in cooperatives, relatively expensive as well. So that's an issue that's being faced in the UK. So when I came to the UK, cooperative college, which I've been working with actually for the past 10 years, nothing at a university level. They're not authorized to offer anything at a university level as well. They try to cooperate with other organizations. Nothing has happened. Okay, 8. Let's see. I should have gone to Starbucks at the university. There it is. Okay. So there are serious gaps at the higher level of education with regards to co-ops around the world, and that's an important issue. The UK is no different. Worldwide, there tends to be little flexibility in the delivery of cooperative education. I know when I wanted to start something in Newcastle, it was a big fight offering a more flexible approach, because the university leaders, I was dean of a business school, say, oh no, this is can't do it this way. What flexibility? They wanted to go to universities, they should just go to university. That's it. What are you talking about? This type of flexibility, and then you also have the fact that big co-ops send their leaders to quote unquote Ivy League schools to get a very, very excellent non-cooperative management educational experience. So you go to a place, to Harvard or Stanford, where people don't know what a co-op is. They really don't care. And they're taught about management principles that pertain to investor-owned firms. And actually not necessarily to nice investor-owned firms, but rather the ones that are more interested in maximizing share value in the short term, as opposed to maximizing, even in terms of a private firm, the overall productivity advantage of the firm in real terms. So this is what happens in the co-op sector. It's in Australia, it's New Zealand, it's also in Canada, where this is where a lot of co-op leaders are sent. Another challenge is that deans in business schools, most of them are completely opposed to co-ops. They think it's stupid. It's not a it's really serious sector of the economy. They think it's made up of hippies, people in LSD or marijuana or crack, people with earrings and ponytails, all these weird type of people. And this is sort of why would you invest in this type of sector? It makes no sense. So there's this formal opposition you find in most universities when you talk about co-ops. And a lot of it is ignorance. Some of it is ideology, which is based, I think, a lot of it in ignorance. So when I try to do something which I succeeded after a lot of struggle and some support, the big opposition I got is say, well, co-ops are it's for hippies, and had a lot of resonance. So it was a big struggle to get something done. My computer, I think, might try to cancel my session, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so hopefully we can move forward. 10. So as I mentioned, there is significant opposition in business schools to cooperative management and organization education. In economics, just as an example, since I'm in economics, there is not one textbook in economics except one that I wrote that has any reference to cooperatives. So they talk about, well, different types of firm organization. They talk about all these different alternatives, but nothing about co-ops. Now some of the textbooks talk about social enterprise, but this is more of a flaky, subsidized organization. They don't talk about co-ops. So students come out of university knowing very, very little about co-ops. There was at U of S, there was an undergraduate course on cooperatives, which I think has been canceled. When I was head of economics, it was still going. It was started in agricultural economics. Murray taught the course, then it went over to economics. I agreed to take it over, and it was taught by Alphonse Boving. But this is one of the few universities that had anything at the undergraduate level on co-ops. But once again, I think it doesn't exist anymore, which is too bad. So one thing is we have the reality of co-ops being completely misunderstood. And if you think about, I don't know if people are familiar with the literature of mental models. Mental models is a way of framing reality. Everyone has a mental model about how different things work. Either it's implicit in the back of your head, or it's very formal, and you can see it before you. But false mental models is used to inform university programming and also the decision-making in many co-ops. And hence, once again, the importance of co-op education and the significance of the gaps that do exist in the cooperative sector with regards to education. So let me go to the International Cooperative Alliance co-op principles. So some people might be familiar with this, and just quickly read it. Cooperatives provide education and training for the members, elected representatives, managers, and employees so that they can contribute effectively to the development of their cooperatives. They inform the general public, particularly young people and opinion leaders, about the nature and benefits of cooperation. So this is actually super important. And I would argue, as with others, that this is also quite significant for the economic viability and sustainability of co-ops as one moves forward. So cooperative principles. If you work with cooperative principles, a cooperative should put a lot of attention to co-op education, not simply university education, but all types of education. And I'm trying to, 12, okay. So something which I'm doing right now, which we might be able to collaborate perhaps with the Center for Cooperatives or anybody else who's interested in this. So, and this is almost now finalized, and I'm building on what I did in Australia. We are working in partnership with the Co-op College UK on developing what we call a micro-credentialed co-op program. in management and organization. So micro-credentialing is basically when a student can take a module, they call it in the UK a module or a course, without being registered in any program in a university. So typically you register at a postgrad level. This is postgrad, not undergrad. You would register in a certain program, and then you would take the modules or the courses in that program. What we're doing is working in the micro-credentialing space, where if you work for a co-op or you work or you're interested in a co-op, you don't have to register in a university degree. You just have to register and pay for that one course. And this is the model we're working with to launch what we're going to be doing at the University of Dundee in the School of Business. This is flexible. This is what the industry wants. They don't want, because a lot of their members aren't interested in a university degree, but the modules are stackable. In other words, if you're interested in one module, you might do another one and another one, another one. As you collect your modules or your courses, you can stack them up into a certificate or a diploma. And then you can stack that into, if you want to, a Master of Science. So if you're interested in the management area, that can be something that's quite attractive. And so that's what we're doing. This whole model was a product of discussing with, having a lot of discussions with industry, especially in Australia, and now also in the UK. So this is all geared to industry needs, which is also very weird for a lot of universities. And so why should we listen to industry? Well, because they generate a lot of demand to universities for university modules and university courses, university programs. And we talk about cooperatives. If we're serious about cooperatives, we actually have to respect what cooperators want and not, in a sense, impose our will on the cooperative sector and on cooperators. So we'll end up with a University Dundee certification, and they would get a diploma on cooperative management and organization. There'll be some choices, some flexibility. It's all online, but there are options for on-campus a campus session, so everyone can meet, deliver their project, or they could do it through the cloud synchronously. Now, this is what this should be launched relatively soon, and it'll be interesting. It'll be the first time in the UK that you'll have this university provision, and a lot of co-ops are interested in this, and they want their students to be educated, in the UK, and there's also a lot of Commonwealth countries that are interested in this as well. Now, this links actually to research that, and I hinted at this before, which suggests that productivity is significantly affected by the quality of management. And this importance of management is significant both for investor-owned firms and member-owned organizations, cooperatives. But the cooperative advantage, and this also relates to fairness within the firm, actually can only be achieved if management understands and is supportive of cooperative principles within the firm. If you hire managers who think cooperatives are completely weird and inefficient and ineffective, the first thing they try to do is impose investor-owned firm principles on the co-op. And very often that leads to bankruptcy. One of the biggest bankruptcies in the Australian co-op history was the recent bankruptcy of the cooperative bookstore. And I had to deal with these. A lot of these were complete idiots. They didn't care what student wanted. They never told students about the cooperative. There was no voice by members. They were just interested in maximizing profits. And they bankrupted the co-op. It was an absolute unabided disaster. And this is an organization, it was one of the largest co-ops in Australia, went broke. There was a dairy co-op that went broke as well. And that was because the CEO and CFO really didn't give a damn about co-ops. They didn't care about co-ops. They were interested they were maximizing their own benefits and income. They did not, there was no transparency. Members weren't involved, even at a higher level in the running of the co-op. And it was a disaster. Farmers lost a lot. It was, and it collapsed. And there are other instances, similar instances in the UK with the cooperative bank, where people running the co-op bank, this is also during the financial crisis, they brought in people who were true socialists, but had no idea of how to run a co-op. Everything, there was no transparency. The head of the co-op, who was a very strong, I guess he was considered to be a good socialist, but he was a drug addict and a pedophile. and he was unethical and immoral, and he almost bankrupted the co-op bank. It would take a lot of co-ops with him. So co-op principles are critical. Management education is critical. So for a lot of people in the co-op sector, there should be no hiring of a manager who does not understand cooperative principles and who does not believe in trying to implement, to the best of her or his ability, cooperative principles and to make it work. Sometimes you have to, it's not dogmatic, these cooperative principles are different. There's all sorts of flexibility. You could even raise money if you need it on the share market, if you do it the right way. But anyway, cooperative advantage, productivity, significant of well-informed managers, people on the board. If you want to get things right, if you want to make a true success over time of cooperatives and allow for the growth of the cooperative sector. And you have of course, in Canada, you had the failure of the I forget the name now, the mountain equipment, by doing it saying it right, the mountain equipment co-op that started off in Alberta. That's also a mess. And a lot of that is because they were more interested in growth and taking over the whole market than being a co-op. And there are, of course, a whole bunch of other complications. But anyway, this stresses the importance of cooperative education at the low level. That's the wrong term, but at the non-university level, but also at the university level. I'm trying to go to the next page, if possible. Oh, here it is. Hope it stays there. Don't move. Oh, it moved. Here it is. This is the last slide, by the way. So many co-ops, as I mentioned, hire managers who believe in the for-profit, who believe that the for-profit operational principles are ideal to running a firm. So they have a particular mental model. And many actually believe that demutualization should be the end game, that it'll be better for all co-op members to demutualize, take home a whole bunch of cash, and then have a private firm in the place of a co-op. And you see some of this, and it's of some significance, less so in Europe, by the way. So this is another reason to underline the importance of cooperative education at a management level, at a university level. Also critical is for members to have knowledge about the reality of cooperatives, the reality of cooperative governments, as opposed to accepting the mainstream belief that co-ops are second best on all fronts. Now, this is a false mental model. It has nothing to do with people being stupid or silly. It has to do with education. It has to do with knowledge. And false mental models generate policy which are inappropriate for cooperatives, and at the end of the day can be damaging. So I went from co-ops in Scotland to the serious gaps in education and cooperatives to what we're doing now in the UK with university level cooperative education, which is mainly executive education that's flexible and that speaks to the need of cooperators throughout the UK and all those who want to partner with us at this particular level of certification. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Well, Professor Altman, you have provided us with a very rich and thought-provoking talk. You've given me a lot to think about, and I want to have everyone please join me in thanking Professor Altman for this talk. And we have a few minutes for questions. Please feel free to either write your questions in the chat, raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom, or just physically raise your hand. I will try to flag you down and ask the question for you or provide you with the mic so that you can ask your question yourself. Any questions? Oh, seems like everyone is being shy this morning.
So does anyone here think that there is a gap in cooperative education?
I
Dion
see one. Dion.
Hi, sorry, you might get some background feedback because I'm in transit a bit right now, but I thank you for the interesting presentation, Morris. I have a question for you about whether or not you think that there is a real need for, separate co-op management programs, or if it actually would be better to incorporate co-op ideas, frameworks, principles, research into the sort of standard business commerce programs and education. I've gone back and forth over the years and what I think about that. I'm not sure really where I'm at right now with it. I think there are pros and cons to both. Just wondering what you think works, or if it's both and, or where your thoughts are on that.
Well, thanks, Dion. I've been going back and forth depending where I am, what institution I'm involved with. It's always good to have, I think, cooperative principles introduced in different ways in modules where possible. I think that's great in terms of general education of our students. Just like in my business school, we're trying to introduce ethical issues into our modules. But that doesn't mean one shouldn't have a program on cooperatives. I think it's really important, especially speaking to the sector, that having a pathway or a postgraduate minor in cooperatives is critical. Most of the industries, and they're not interested in students getting a major or doing let's say an MBA in cooperatives or a Master of Science in cooperatives. What they're interested in is students having some basis, a strong basis in cooperatives, combined very often with a mainstream MBA or a mainstream degree. So I think having modules specific to co-ops, which are stackable if a student wants, into a certificate, which then can be stackable into a Master of Science or an MBA, is actually a very good way to go. And from what I can see, this is what a lot of cooperators want. They want something out there. They want to take a module, let's say specifically on cooperative management. Others would like to take a module or a course on accounting for cooperatives, which can be quite different, or the history of cooperatives. Why are cooperatives successful? So a focus on that, I think, to my mind, I think it's useful. I think the time has come. I think it's up to us to revolutionize the way cooperative education is provided in universities, and we have to start somewhere. I think some significant inroads are being made now at the University of Saskatchewan, which is wonderful. We're doing something now in the UK, and to the extent that we can collaborate and cooperate, I think that would enhance our ability to provide cooperators with the type of education they need, but also to break a lot of the myths about co-ops. I think it would be great to have, again, we don't have this in Dundee, but to have a course, undergraduate course on co-ops, so that undergraduate students understand that there are different ways of approaching businesses. There are different ways of doing things, and co-ops, it's not for everyone, is one way. Anyway, hopefully
So
answer your question.
sorry, yeah, just one quick follow-up, I guess just a brief comment that, I mean, at the Johnson Schreiber Graduate School, when I was there in previous years, we did have a micro-credentialing option that was stackable into a master's program. And we found that it wasn't in that high demand. And I think one of the things that people in the co-op sector struggle with, right, is that there's sort of the academic side that sometimes is not as immediately usable for people who are, and so I think this micro-credentialing idea is an interesting one, but I think that the demand, it's a question about whether or not the demand is actually there for it, because I think we struggled a little bit with that.
Well, working with UK, with the cooperative college in UK, we see a strong demand for what we're going to be offering, and it's also it's basically one advantage is that students will just have to take one module. They just take what they need, and it's online as well, with the option of having a session, having 1 week on campus at Dundee, if people want to take that advantage. So I think a market is there, but we have to work with industry. We have to work closely with industry and with community groups to generate that, to help bring students in. And in Australia, when we started this in Australia, it was difficult, but there was a market, especially in the agricultural sector. And it was actually building up. It was financially viable. And this was not a full master. It was a pathway into a potential pathway into the MBA. So I understand there are challenges, but I think we can be successful as compared to institutions that offer a full-blown master's on cooperatives, which is more costly and it's less flexible. So anyway, that's how I see it. Hopefully, I hope I'm right.
Excellent. I am cognizant that we have 4 minutes left here for this session. We have a couple of questions in the chat here, Morris. Maybe we could do a quick round of rapid fire. I'll ask them in succession here. Is there research available on how a developing co-op can structure its financial system for co-ops? For example, how to set up share investment, payment if dividend on capital, patronage, etc. Some sort of how-to for financial structure. Do you know of any resources?
I would have to think about that. There was literature that was produced, especially with regards to the Fonterra cooperative in New Zealand, which is the largest exporter of dairy products in the world, where they went through a lot of reorganization to raise capital, and also to allow for people to retire without destroying the co-op. So there's some literature. If you look on Fonterra, there's a lot of interesting literature that's come around on that. But I would have to check. I would have to go and think through this.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll have this question as our last question. It's from Mike. Why do potential clients/members show so little interest in a co-op model as demonstrated by the tiny footprint of the co-op industry compared to the general commercial world? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think the footprint isn't all that tiny. You really have to look at the different sectors. I think overall, the co-op sector internationally produces about 4 to 5% of world output. That's not huge, but it's also not insignificant. And in many countries, co-ops contribute about 50 to 80% of all agricultural output. And even in Europe, for example, the banking sector, the cooperatives, depending on the country, contribute 20, 30, 40% of provision in that sector. Cooperative housing, where it exists, in the Netherlands, contributes about 80% to the housing market. But there is a point. There are different types of cooperatives. Employee cooperatives are not necessarily going to be very popular. It can be high risk to employees, and employees would rather owners, investors take the risk. They have a job. If the company goes bankrupt, they lose their job, but they don't lose their life savings. They rather somebody else lose their life savings, and that's quite a rational response. And there needs to be ways of working around that to protect workers who wish to establish an employee cooperative. And also with regards to consumer cooperatives and agricultural cooperatives in Saskatchewan, there's a strong resistance to agricultural cooperatives. They figure that's going to be an impingement on their individual liberties, individual rights. I think there's a lack of education on what cooperatives can deliver, how effective and how efficient they can be. And I think that's one of the barriers to entry, if you wish, to the growth of cooperatives. It's not the only issue, but I think that's certainly one. In China, a lot of farmers remember quite vividly the horrors of the Maoist regime, where cooperatives were a tool of the government. And the same in India, under the British and then under independent India, co-ops were a tool of government, and as opposed to independent entities that represented the interest of members. So I think those are some explanations. It's an important area, though, that we need to think about and address.
Thank you, Professor Altman. With that, I would like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us today. I hope you found this session as thought-provoking as I did. The Canadian Centre for the Study of Cooperatives will be back with more public lectures and the return of our monthly brown bag in September. Please feel free to follow us on social media, as well as check us out on our website for all of the upcoming news and activities. And with that, hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you again for joining us.